Tonight, a Democratic presidential candidates debate. Nuclear arms, build up, cut back, or freeze. Participating in tonight's debate, Senator Alan Cranston, Senator John Glenn, Senator Gary Hart, Senator Ernest Hollings, former Senator George McGovern, former Vice President Walter Mondale, and former Florida Governor Reuben-ASKEW. Broadcast live by WCBB-TV in Boston from the forum at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The moderator for tonight's debate, Peter Mahegan.
Good evening and welcome to Harvard University. Tonight we bring you an important debate among 7 men seeking the Democratic presidential nomination. Our subject tonight, nuclear arms, build up, cut back, or freeze. This debate is co-sponsored by the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government here at Harvard University and the Massachusetts Citizens Coalition for Arms Control. The chairman of the coalition is Congressman Edward Markey. Thank you, Congressman. It's my pleasure now to welcome the 7 presidential candidates who will be debating tonight. They are former Governor Reuben-ASKEW of Florida, Senator Alan Cranston of California, Senator John Glenn of Ohio, Senator Gary Hart of Colorado, Senator Ernest Hollings of South Carolina, former Senator George McGovern of South Dakota, and former Vice President Walter Mondale. The ground rules tonight are simple. Some questions will be answered by all candidates, and other questions will be directed to particular candidates. At the end of the debate, each candidate will ask another candidate a question. The order of responses has been determined by lottery, and there are time limits on each answer. So let's begin. The first question will be answered by all the candidates, and asking it is Graham Allison, Dean of the Kennedy School of Government and a principal investigator in Harvard's new project on avoiding nuclear war. Dean Allison.
The question is, what is the most important difference between your position on nuclear arms control and that of the other candidates sitting with you tonight?
Senator Hollings has the first answer to that.
The principal difference between myself and the other candidates is realism. I think that we should not play around with this. On the matter of nuclear arms control, the first thing for a president to do is to immediately control himself. Specifically, you can't use the strident language or use it politically to give church groups talks down in Florida calling the Soviet the evil empire. Secondly, you should make it a bipartisan approach, absolutely. Bring in the best on the Republican side to work with you from the beginning of your term. Thirdly, you should correlate with your particular allies. And then fourthly, after you've done that, set out a particular plan for arms control as I have. I submitted one to the Society of Editors and Publishers. It would reduce armaments, some 1,500 warheads. It's been declared by Ambassador Cygnus of the Arms Control Director for President Carter as a good first step.
Thank you, Senator. The next reply is from Senator Hart on your position.
I am the only candidate for president in this race to have grown up in the nuclear age. I think those of us of my generation look upon nuclear weapons differently. I think we understand particularly what they mean for the destruction of our civilization, what they mean for the ultimate destruction, as Congressman Markey said, of all mankind. Because of that, those of us who come into politics in the 1970s have made a centerpiece of our public life and our public policy direction not only the freezing, halting, and stopping of the nuclear arms race, but the reversal of it. Among these candidates, I think I was the first to have laid out a broad-based arms control agenda that focused not only on the number of weapon systems which both sides possess, but on the key issue that no other candidate has addressed so far, and that is the prevention of the use of nuclear weapons and the making this planet safe for all time for future generations.
Thank you, Senator. Governor, ask you on how your view differs from the other candidates.
Well, mine is rather easy. I respect the freeze movement. I think without it, the president would have never moved off dead center. And I believe that they've made a tremendous contribution. But I do not support the nuclear freeze. I believe, first of all, that we're going to have to be able to do some modernizing as we attempt to negotiate. I think the president has caused us problems by foot dragging to begin with in terms of starting the negotiations. I think in addition to this, as I sit down, having been a negotiator, not an arms negotiator, the very fact that you would sit down on the other side and the other side knows that you've got to produce a solution very quickly, I don't think is the best way for a president to put themselves into that type of posture. Plus, I have some problems in terms of realizing the difficulty of verification. I think we need a mutual verifiable arms reduction proposal, but I don't think that freeze is the proper approach to it.
Senator Glenn, on what distinguishes your view from the others, sir?
I think I've had a more detailed policy in this for some time than any of the other candidates. I have a 5-point policy I've been putting forward. It's limit, reduce, prevent the spread, involve other weapon states, and overall arms control. Let me run through those very briefly. Limit. The nuclear freeze, mutual and verifiable, yes, absolutely. SALT II, if the nuclear freeze can't go through, now that we can verify it, yes. That's the limit above which neither side would then build. That's not enough, though. We have to reduce all those tens of thousands of nuclear weapons on each side. So put the very finest negotiating team we can over there to get the reduction talks going. Number 3, prevent the spread to other nations while we're doing that. It'll do us a little good to get a dozen other nations with nuclear weapons while we're negotiating with the Soviets. I was a principal author of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act of '78, and I think it should be enforced, not bypassed. Number 4, how can we ever get arms control with the Soviets if we really don't get the other nuclear weapon states, France, Britain, and China, into this whole equation, get them into the arms talks, and it should be part of overall arms control.
We'll have to catch up to that last point later, Senator. Senator Cranston, your view, sir.
The difference is that I view the threat of nuclear war as the overriding issue of our time, an issue of the survival of our country, an issue of the survival of the human race. And I would give it a priority that no other president has ever given this challenge. I also bring a background that goes all the way back to 1945 when the bombs fell at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Albert Einstein. I met Einstein then. I visited with him more than once at Princeton. He educated me in the significance of the dangers of nuclear war, warning that a nuclear war could destroy the environment that sustains life on this planet. All other issues hang on our success in coping with this issue. Therefore, I would concentrate, as no president has ever concentrated, on the task of coping with this dire threat to all of us.
Senator Mondale.
Every major arms control effort of that period. I've negotiated with the Soviets. I've worked with our NATO allies. I've served on the National Security Council. I've served in both the Senate and in the White House, and I know how to get it done. Secondly, in terms of the comprehensive nature of my arms control proposal, I think they are the most balanced and hopeful of all. I was the first candidate running for president to announce his support for the freeze. I have proposed a new set of objectives for START, for strategic systems, that I think are very hopeful. I have proposed the re-proposal of the NITSE agreement last year that would prevent the deployment of Pershings, and a whole range of other initiatives for comprehensive test bans, for anti-satellite control, for withdrawing our battlefield nukes from the front line, and for annualized summit conference with the Soviet Union. I can get it done.
Senator McGovern.
We usually think of military spending as a way of strengthening the country, but President Eisenhower, the only five-star general ever to serve as President of the United States, once said that if the military spends too much, it weakens the country by depriving us of other sources of national strength. I think we're now at that level where military spending of an excessive nature not only threatens the survival of the race, but is also weakening America. It's bankrupting our national treasury, it's contributing to a $200 billion federal deficit, and it is undermining funds that we need for education, for health care, for environment, and other important sources of national power. I'm the only candidate here recommending a 25% cut in the Reagan $275 billion 84 military budget. That would still leave us the strongest military power on earth, but would free $75 billion to build up America.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we will take questions prepared by the Massachusetts Citizens Coalition for Arms Control, one of tonight's sponsors. A different question goes to each candidate, and we'll take the first question, please.
Senator McGovern, my name is Agnes Connolly. You've been quoted as favoring a unilateral freeze on U.S. nuclear weapons development. The National Freeze Campaign, however, wants a bilateral freeze where both sides stop. Do you believe the United States should stop even if the Soviets continue to build nuclear weapons?
Yes, I do. I think that for the time being, I wouldn't put any definite time limit on this. We could well afford, in our own interest, for some of the reasons I've just outlined, the economic reasons among others, to follow the example of the late President Kennedy, who moved us to the nuclear test ban agreement by announcing that without reference to the Soviet Union, we were halting the testing of nuclear weapons, and we would not resume if the Soviets followed suit. They did follow suit. We got the limited test ban treaty. I think the same kind of initiative now, at a time when we have the capacity to destroy the Soviet Union several times over without building one additional nuclear weapon, would be a safe initiative for the United States to take. If it were not picked up by the Soviets and reductions on their side, we could always resume the building of nuclear weapons. That's an option that's always open.
The next question, please.
Governor Askew, my name is Steve Kramer. You are the only Democratic presidential candidate who does not support the nuclear freeze. Can you again tell us why?
Well, first of all, I believe that we all essentially want the same thing. We want peace. We want to be able to have an arms control agreement. I just don't believe that the nuclear freeze is the right way to get the arms control agreement. I think it puts all the pressure on us. The Soviet Union watches us every night on prime time. They know exactly what we're all running for, and I just don't want to sit across that table and have the pressure of trying to produce such a solution so quickly, as complex as it did. If it took us several years to negotiate out the verification provision of SALT II, what are we talking about in terms of verification of all-encompassing nuclear freeze? And also, I think that we really do need, by way of definition, to be able to selectively modernize. When you get into the freeze, they say, oh yes, you can maintain and update. I'd much be freer to modernize so that you can remove destabilizing systems and also remove those that are the most vulnerable. And I think that you have more flexibility if you don't go to that. I'm still for, obviously, for arms control, and I frankly think it's a paramount issue of our time, and I would have no other higher priority.
Our next question goes to Senator Glenn.
Senator Glenn, my name is Alan Kay. By how many billions of dollars would you increase or decrease our defense budget?
I think we could decrease probably somewhere between $12 and $15 billion, as I see it, over what the President has proposed. I think his 10% was too much. I thought the House cut too much the other direction. The areas where I would cut, I led the fight on the Senate floor 3 years ago against the MX. I'm not a come lately to the MX argument at all. I favored the smaller mobile at that time. I still think the MX is, it's a 192,000-pound monster that can only be a more attractive target than we started out to begin with. Rapid deployment force is not, it has three problems. It's not rapid, not deployable, and it's not a force. So we could save the money on that. It's basically stockpiling material out ahead of the troops, something I've never heard of in all warfare. The Bradley fighting vehicle, we could do away with it, over budget, under performance. Same thing with the DIV-AD, Division Air Defense. You total all those up, they come out to somewhere between $12 and $15 billion, and I think that's about the cut that we should make.
Next question goes to Senator Cranston.
Senator Cranston, my name is Carol Donovan. You've made the nuclear freeze a centerpiece of your campaign. However, you did support the B-1 bomber. Do you now favor halting the production of the B-1 bomber to achieve a bilateral freeze, or would the B-1 be exempt from your freeze?
It would not be exempt. I support the freeze. That would stop the B-1. I am for deterrence until we get something better, which is arms control. Deterrence depends upon a survivable nuclear capacity in the triad: bombers and submarines, bombers and missiles and submarines, missiles and silos, and missiles and bombers. The bomber is the best from an arms control point of view. It is identifiable, verifiable, it is slow, so it's not a first strike weapon, and it is controlled by human beings. You can abort the mission if you find you were fired by error or if you work out the problem. For those reasons, it's preferable to the other two legs of the triad, but I would stop it with the freeze.
Question for Senator Hart.
Senator Hart, my name is Marilyn Ling O'Connell. In addition to the freeze, you've endorsed the nuclear build-down proposal, which has the superpowers eliminate 2 old nuclear weapons for each new one they produce. But the build down still allows both sides to build more powerful and accurate weapons, which the freeze would stop. Does your support for build down contradict your support for the freeze?
No, it does not at all. In fact, I am unalterably opposed to President Reagan's version of the build down because it does not attack the fundamental challenge of the nuclear arms race, and that is the merging of systems and the multiplication of warheads on our land-based and sea-based systems. That is the most dangerous trend because those systems are becoming more accurate. With the multiple warheads, they represent the ability to fight a nuclear war for the first time, and by putting our new land-based missiles in a targetable place, it is the first time in the history of nuclear weaponry that we have purposely deployed a missile where it can be knocked out. That is the most destabilizing situation one can imagine, and it is the reason why I tied the Senate up for 2.5 weeks, unfortunately unsuccessfully, in the filibuster against the MX. I am not for any build down as an alternative to the freeze. I am for a build down that stops the production of the most dangerous systems and requires destruction of existing systems. By the way, there aren't any old ones. Every nuclear weapon in our inventory can be delivered on the Soviet Union and can destroy millions of lives.
A question for Senator Hollings.
Senator Hollings, my name is Steve Gallant. In 2 months, we are scheduled to begin deploying Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe. This will create a dangerous situation with the Pershing IIs just minutes from their targets in the Soviet Union. If we do not reach an agreement with the Soviets by December, would you favor a 1-year delay in the deployment to allow more time for negotiators to reach an agreement?
No, I would not. The dangerous situation that's been created is the deployment of SS-20s by the Soviet Union itself. In fact, when they said in November 1981 we had a balance at that particular time and they wanted to freeze, now they've continued to deploy, even though their spokesman on yesterday said they'd never agreed to an agreement that would allow deploying. They are the ones deploying and have gone from 250 to 350 SS-20s. We learned with the ABM debate that we had to go forward with the ABM. We had some of our colleagues here argue, just as your question argues, that that's the only way to get an agreement is to not do it. On the contrary, going forward with the ABM, we were finally able to obtain an ABM treaty, and I think in this stead what we really need to do is go forward with the deployment of the Pershing IIs and cruise missiles and counter their particular threat, and thereby then have a mutual interest in an agreement.
Next question is for Senator Mondale.
Mr. Mondale, my name is Fred Rupp. The question is, you've announced that you oppose the building of the MX missile, but the Carter administration, of which you were a part, approved deploying the MX. Do you regret that decision? And if so, what other nuclear weapons decisions from the Carter administration would you reverse?
I opposed in private the decision for the MX missile. I thought it was a mistake. As a matter of fact, I joined with Senator Kennedy, Senator Brooke at that time, to fight the MIRVing entirely. And we led a fight to stop MIRVing, to try to reach an agreement with the Soviet Union would prevent the whole entrance into the multiple warhead era. We failed. And I've always been for a mobile, single warhead weapon system, which is now known as the Midget Man. I would not build the MX, which I think is the most dangerous of all single weapon systems ever deployed, because it's totally destabilizing, and I believe in the single mobile system.
The order of responses by the candidates, we remind you, has been chosen by lottery tonight. Next, a question all the candidates will answer. And asking that question is Dean Graham Allison of the Kennedy School of Government. Dean Allison.
This is the 38th year since World War II. Despite the buildup of enormous nuclear arsenals on both sides, there has been no nuclear war. Looking back on those 4 decades, what, in your view, has the U.S. government done right? What have we done wrong? And what would you have done differently?
Governor Askew. Governor Askew has the...
And that's in 60 seconds. I believe that we had an effective deterrent. A nuclear freeze doesn't preserve the peace, neither does arms control. It's an effective deterrent. At the same time, you obviously want to try to reduce the tensions. So it's been that. I believe that we should have been much more aggressive in terms of arms control negotiations, and I think almost all throughout the history, but we've also been fairly successful. Let's don't overlook the fact that we have had some successes in SALT I and some of the other treaties. I think that what I would do now is that I would go in with a ceiling, not a freeze, a ceiling of the total ballistic missiles and also the total destructive capability, and then literally try to reduce. It's not a freeze. You'd be able to do some modernization within it, but I believe had we not gone to MIRVing, I think we'd have been a lot better off. I think that was a very basic mistake because I think it was destabilizing.
Senator Glenn has the next crack at that one.
I think if we go way back, we all wish we could really go back to the days of Lilienthal and Baruch and put things nuclear back under some sort of international control, but we can't do that. That genie's out of the bottle, or you can't unring that bell, I guess. What I would like to have seen done more forcefully by the last several administrations is carrying out the provisions of, for instance, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act to prevent the spread, one of those 5 points I mentioned a little while ago. We've been on a dual track. While we're negotiating with the Soviets here, trying to get existing weapons stockpiles under control, we must at the same time prevent the spread of nuclear weaponry to more and more countries, or the whole thing will be beyond complete control. So I would go back again. Limit first with the nuclear freeze, mutual and verifiable. Has to be mutual and verifiable. Then we go to reduction talks, the best we possibly can get, the best teams over there. Involve other weapon states, in addition to the carrying out the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, involve other nuclear weapon states, because I just don't see how we're going to get the Soviets to take their stockpiles down to an appreciably low level unless we do that. And finally, it has to be part of overall arms control, and that's a 5-point program that I think we should have been carrying out a long time ago.
Senator Cranston.
Under every American president since 1945, and under every Soviet leader since 1945, we have slipped closer to the abyss. We've left arms control to arms control experts, and they have failed us. We've left the direction of arms control experts to presidents, and they have not immersed themselves adequately in the issue, so they too have failed us. The arms control experts have bogged down in arcane matters like surgical strikes, throw weight, doctrines like mutual assured destruction, MAD. Where are ethical and moral principles? Where is common sense? Where is wisdom? We need a president that will take the leadership in negotiating directly with the Soviets, with top aides present, of course, without preconditions, without pre-negotiations, to achieve a freeze and then reductions and abolition of these weapons from God's earth, accompanied by efforts to cut back on conventional weapons as well.
Mr. McGovern.
Well, no one can deny that deterrence has had something to do with preventing nuclear war, preventing conventional war perhaps as well. But as Senator Cranston has said, each new round of the nuclear escalation brings us that much closer to the possibility of destroying the entire world. I think there's several fundamental mistakes that were made. At the time we went for the limited test ban treaty, it's regrettable that we didn't try for a comprehensive test ban. It might have been possible even 20 years ago. Secondly, it was a great mistake to go to the MIRV system. We argued that we would do that simply as a bargaining chip to get the SALT I treaty. But once we had the SALT I treaty, we didn't give up the MIRV system, and neither of the Soviets. This is one of the problems with using bargaining chips. They're never given up. The same thing will happen with the MX missile if we decide to deploy that.
Senator Hart.
In spite of the fact that every president, from President Kennedy to President Carter, committed themselves to leadership on arms control, I don't think we committed ourselves enough. What I saw as an advisor to the SALT talks in Geneva, and I made several trips there and have gone since, was the effort on the part of representatives of our government and our negotiators to seek reductions in controls on Soviet systems which threatened us the most, but to protect the right of our military to develop those weapon systems which it wanted the most. And I remember in the hearings on the SALT II treaty, which I very strongly supported in 77, 78, and 79, that I asked the military leadership a series of questions as to whether SALT II would prevent a certain number of weapon systems. I think there were 18 modernization programs or steps being taken. And the military testified in open hearing that SALT II would permit us to go forward on 18 specific modernization steps. That is not real arms control. I agree that the decision to go forward with multiple warheads was perhaps the most serious mistake that this country has made.
Senator Hollings.
We have not been realistic on arms control, and we've been too political. I would remove it from the realm of politics by making it totally bipartisan and have the Dean Allisons and others serve on a commission so that we would have those all joining together. This is too dangerous and too serious a subject to posture over or to play politics or to have to obtain an agreement in order to help yourself out politically in a presidential race, which is just the posture at this moment of the President of the United States. I would then, in a realistic fashion, like SALT I, it didn't work. Henry Kissinger said it didn't work in testimony in 1979. SALT II gave the perception of an arms agreement. It did not control missiles, it did not control warheads, and it did not control the matter of the launches. We must educate our people and be realistic in moving forward. We must develop a massive public opinion against the use of nuclear on both sides. This is an educational role for the President of the United States. It does not lend itself to programmatic solutions.
Mr. Mondale.
The best things we've done is to ratify the Kennedy Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty, the SALT I Treaty, the ABM Treaty, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaties. The worst thing we've done is to fail to ratify SALT II, which is a superb treaty, verifiable, and should have been ratified. Its failure to be ratified could prove to be fateful. The worst decision being made today, the most dangerous, is to deploy the fixed-base MX system. And the biggest failure over the years is the failure to institutionalize annual top-level meetings between the President of the United States and the head of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union does not move quickly or flexibly as we do. They don't have debates like we have tonight. They're very hierarchical. And unless you can reach an agreement and understanding with the head of the Soviet state, nothing else will move. It has been almost 10 years since there was a serious discussion between the President of the United States and the head of the Soviet Union on the very question of the survival of civilization. And I think just as we meet with the great industrial states, every year we ought to sit down for 3 or 4 days in private and grind away with the head of the Soviet Union, see if we can't make some sense.
In this next round, we will take questions from our audience here tonight. Again, a different question for each candidate. And we'll take the first question from the audience, please.
Senator Hart, my name is Maria Hanratty. Do you support research into and/or production and deployment of nerve gas weapons?
No, I do not. In March of 1975, about less than 60 days after I was sworn in to the United States Senate, I introduced an amendment to the Armed Services Committee authorization bill that would completely eliminate all funds for advanced research or production of nerve gas or chemical agents. And I have continued that policy consistently for the past 9 years. We do not need another generation of nerve gas.
A question to Senator Cranston, please.
Senator Cranston, my name is Yoni Korhonen. What do you believe will be the Soviet Union's response to the U.S. deployment of Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe if the current negotiations don't produce any results?
Well, first, I hope it will not proceed. Those weapons are not needed for our security. We already have weapons in Europe, a triad capable of inflicting great damage on the Soviet Union and Soviet satellites. If we proceed with a weapon system that is not really needed and that is proposed only for diplomatic, political reasons, I suppose the Soviets will break off arms negotiations with us for a time, and they may escalate their own weaponry in one way or another, leading to yet another round in an arms race that has gone higher and higher with each negotiation. One of the troubles with every arms control effort thus far is each side has sought advantage over the other. The consequence has been more weapons, not less.
A question for Governor Askew.
Governor Askew, my name is Andrew Stone. What is your opinion of the high frontier strategy of defense, development of satellite technologies, particle beams, and the like, supported by President Reagan?
I think that we can launch off assuming that we can get an advantage, and I think we have to assume that almost anything we can come up with, the Soviet Union can come up with, And so I think that it's just would be very expensive, and I think we ought to be extremely careful and selective. There may be some areas which absolutely by national security require it. Unfortunately, I'm one of the ones without benefit of any confidential information. It seems to me that he predicates it on being able to do something without the other side being able to combat it. And all of the arms, history of arms has shown that every time we do something moving, the Soviets can do that as well. So I would hope that we'd be very careful moving in this entire area.
A question for Senator Glenn.
Senator Glenn, my name is Paul Capuccio. As President, what specific measures would you take to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons to other nations? And how do you plan to enforce these measures?
I was a principal author of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act of 1978, and that was exactly the purpose of that. We tried to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons by preventing the equipment from which those weapons can be made. I think we had a good effect for a while, but I realized even at that time we were passing that legislation that it was not the answer for the long term. It had maybe a 10 or 15-year beneficial effect to it, because beyond that time we might have new chemical ways of enriching uranium, perhaps new laser isotope separation and things like that. What I would do first is absolutely enforce the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act. Both the last administration and this administration have come up short on that. We went ahead in the last administration sold the nuclear fuel to India, which was in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act. I lost that fight on the Senate floor 48 to 46. In this administration, we've had the sale of heavy water to Argentina. We've had the parts sales to India. I'd enforce that as a good place to start. I think if we enforced it, we might have a beneficial effect on a lot of nations.
A question for Mr. McGovern, please.
Mr. McGovern, my name is Toby Miller. What is your position pertaining to the Soviet Union's attitude against President Reagan's arms reduction proposals, and what would you do if you were in President Reagan's position?
Well, I can't speak for the Soviet Union on their objection to the Reagan program. I understand that what their principal objection rests on is the Reagan insistence that there has to be sharp reductions in land-based missiles. That happens to be where most of the Soviet strategic system is. Most of ours are on submarines and on bombers. So I suppose it's understandable that you don't get very far with a power like the Soviet Union in arguing they dismantled a major part of their strategic system. What I would recommend is that we revive the SALT II treaty. It didn't go very far. It was a very limited treaty, but as the Joint Chiefs said at the time, it was a modest step in the right direction. The Soviets have signed that. They've been ready to go on it, both under the Ford administration and the Carter administration. That's where we ought to resume negotiations.
Next question, please.
Mr. Mondale, my name is John Barrett. The Soviet Union has promised the world community that they will never be the first to employ nuclear weapons in combat. If you were president, would you make a similar no first use pledge?
The recommendation that I have made in this field is that we move ahead rapidly to deploy the state-of-the-art, which now permits us to blunt the tank advantage that the Soviets enjoy in Eastern Europe, which has been the reason traditionally for the first-use doctrine. And as soon as we can, drop the first-use doctrine, because increasingly it is a massive embarrassment to us. Increasingly it is a threat that is hollow, but we now have an alternative that is affordable, that's been recommended by the SACEUR, the head of the NATO forces, that will provide the alternative. We ought to move as rapidly as we can with the help of the NATO alliance to put that in place.
A question for Senator Hollings.
Senator Hollings, my name is Steve Lincoln. Please state what you believe would be the single most effective action that the U.S. could take to achieve a new nuclear arms agreement with the Soviets.
Elect me president. I'm very serious about that. You go to our failures, and you know the personality of President Reagan. He has not been serious. He's at least given that impression. Gene Rostow testified that the Soviets were not serious. We've both been posturing, maneuvering. The strategy of the Soviet has been to divide the United States from its allies in Europe, take us up to the brink, work with the demonstrators and everything else of that kind. You need someone who really feels this threat, like I do, and is a realist and knows how to get agreements. And as a president of the United States, having been an old trial lawyer, I know how to work cautiously, calmly, and not in the headlines, deliberately. That's why my particular proposal has been submitted, the only one that's been commended by the Director of Arms Control, General Cygnus, as realistic and a very, very good first step.
Next tonight, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask a question of another candidate. The pairings were chosen by lottery, and the candidates have not been told ahead of time who will be asking them a question. Senator Glenn, your question goes to Mr. Mondale.
How can he get through? Yeah. Fritz, in arms control, above all, our people want to know that we're honest with them and we have the courage of our convictions. Just over 3 years ago, you worked long and hard in favor of the sale of F-15s to Saudi Arabia, the grain embargo, and even the nuclear fuel sale to India, and the MX missile, although I heard you comment on that earlier this evening. Question: with regard to these 4 items, are your views today still consistent with what you fought so hard for then?
My views, my personal views, are consistent all the way through. As the President pointed out on the grain embargo, I argued very, very strongly against that grain embargo. As a senator, as a Vice President of the United States, I was the strongest advocate of the imposition of restraints on the distribution of weapons-grade material. And in all the great issues, including the F-15, my voice was heard in the private councils of my administration arguing for restraint. Both as a senator and as a vice president, I think my record on behalf of arms control and stability is superior, and I'm proud of every bit of it, and it's given me experience that I wouldn't have otherwise. Let's add a few other issues. In SALT II, I traveled all over this country arguing for its ratification. I worked with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the national security agencies, the pros and the business, that all said that it was verifiable and it should be ratified, and I deeply regret that the Senate did not ratify it.
Senator Hollings, a question for Mr. Askew.
Governor Askew, there's a maxim in equity that he who seeks equity must do equity. He who seeks arms control must do arms control. I've opposed the M1, MX I should say, and the B1. But you, as not a member of the Congress, have not had the opportunity, I don't believe, to take a position on that. Or perhaps you have. What is your position on the MX and the B-1 bomber?
Well, I'm against the B-1 bomber. I would opt for expanded use of the cruise missiles on B-52s, accelerate the technology on the stealth bomber. I would strongly oppose the MX. I think it is very destabilizing, the very thought that you would put fixed silos, 100 missiles with 10 warheads apiece. I would opt for upgrading your Minutemen III with an MX guidance system, accomplishing the same thing without increasing any warheads, without increasing any of the number of missiles. I'd also like to add, since I'm not a member of the Senate, because everybody I'm running against here, you know, members of the Senate, makes you wonder if all these problems, with all these good ideas, they would have already solved them before tonight. And I'm waiting for Fritz Mondale to say something that he really agreed with Jimmy Carter on too, but I guess I'll still have to wait for that. I'm against nerve gas. I'm for SALT II, ratification of it. I am for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. I'm against the neutron bomb, and I'm against the freeze.
Okay. Mr. McGovern, a question for Senator Glenn, please.
Senator Glenn, first I want to commend you for your proposal yesterday calling for a unilateral U.S. moratorium on intermediate-range missiles in Europe. But secondly, I have felt, and I think a great many others have, that the SALT II treaty, while it was a somewhat limited treaty, was nonetheless in the U.S. interest. That was the position of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and President Ford, President Carter, and others. I think you would agree that you played a key role in halting action on that treaty in the United States Senate. I'm wondering if, in retrospect, you regret that.
First, a correction. What I proposed yesterday in a speech at the National Press Club was on the GLICMs, because I think they're going to be the major destabilizing factor. They can't be verified, and it wasn't just it wasn't the intermediate range ballistic missiles on that. SALT II was not verifiable as I saw it at that time, and I don't think there was a single senator went into that more deeply than I did, because it could not be monitored. And there's a difference between verification of political judgment and monitoring, which is a physical act of being able to observe with satellites, with ground launch, with ground stations, We did not have those at that time. We were blind as far as SALT II went. Joint Chiefs of Staff said that they were for verification, but they could not say how it could be monitored. And privately, I talked to them. They said they didn't know when it could be monitored. All they hoped was that it would be adequate, and that's what they testified, was on verification, not on the capability to monitor. SALT II was passed by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I voted against it there. It went to the floor and was never brought up for a vote because the administration withdrew SALT II from the Senate floor.
Senator Hart to Senator Cranston, please.
Alan, you are to be commended for the degree to which you have surfaced the, not surfaced, but promoted the freeze issue and that approach to arms control, and as an equally committed advocate of that approach as one of several arms control initiatives. I share with you the conviction that it will take some time to negotiate that agreement. In the meantime, you have made an argument here this evening and before for the continuation of the triad, and particularly for the new expensive B-1 bomber. During the period of negotiating that freeze, what other modernization programs would you support?
Well, I would seek to stop everything instantly, and I don't think it takes long to negotiate a freeze. It could be done very simply. It's not nearly as complicated as negotiating a complicated SALT treaty with increases and reductions, and I would not support any modernization during that time because I think it could be done very, very swiftly. The objective, of course, is to start achieving reductions, and that's when it would become complicated, but even that would not, I believe, be difficult. I would immediately announce an end unilaterally to any tests of nuclear weapons as long as the Soviets would likewise stop testing.
Mr. Mondale, a question for Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, George, you're an old bomber pilot. If you were a senator now, would you vote for the B-1?
I would not. I didn't vote for it when I was in the Senate. Even on technical grounds, the mission of that bomber cannot be performed at the present time. It was designed originally to come in under the Soviet radar, which the B-52 was incapable of doing. The Soviets at that time had no capacity to knock it out of the air. They're now swiftly developing a so-called look-down, shoot-down capability that will enable them to knock that $200 million bomber out of the air with a few $1,000s in a missile that can hit it from above. Under those circumstances, even from a military point of view, it is sheer waste to move ahead with the B-1 bomber. If we need that kind of bomber capability, we have it with the B-52 plus the cruise missile, which we also didn't have when we first started talking about the B-1. The B-1 is now an obsolete white elephant.
Senator Cranston for Senator Hart.
Gary, Abraham Lincoln was criticized in 1860 for being a single-issue candidate when he concentrated on preserving the Union and checking slavery. What, in your opinion, is wrong with being labeled a single-issue candidate if your issue is ending an arms race that threatens our very survival, that undermines our economy, and wrecks our capacity to deal with all other issues?
Well, I guess there's nothing wrong with it if you happen to get elected that way. What I find is that people, including those people who are concerned and deeply concerned about the nuclear arms race, are concerned about their jobs, they're concerned about the health of their environment, they're concerned about the education of their children, they're concerned about how to maintain a conventional defense without bankrupting the Treasury. They're concerned about women's rights and equal rights for minorities. And they want to know, not just in a rhetorical sense, that all of us who are candidates for leadership of this party and this nation understand that those are serious questions. They want to know what specifically we intend to do about them. And as you know, one difference that you and I have had on the issue of employment and economics is that you said that you would create a commission to look into the problems of unemployment after you're elected. I have laid out in great detail for the past 2 or 3 years a positive economic platform that not only would put this nation back on its feet, but move us out of the Glenn-Mondale debate.
Mr. Askew for Senator Hollings.
Senator Hollings, I believe that the most likely way that a nuclear war could be started, and I think it's the highest responsibility to avoid this, is by escalation from a conventional war, and that a strong conventional force is absolutely critical if, in fact, you really want to avoid the possibility of escalation. Do you agree with that? And if so, what do you think we should be doing about our conventional forces?
Well, I think, Governor, we are over-prepared for nuclear and under-prepared for conventional warfare. And right to that particular point, in the next 5 years, we will be spending $80 billion a year, over $1 billion a week, on strategic or nuclear weaponry. And as Senator Glenn has pointed out, although I disagree we should scrap it, the rapid deployment force is on paper. We should flesh out that rapid deployment force. We should build up our reserve and guard where we're 400,000 shy. We should have money in operation, maintenance, readiness, more steaming hours, flying hours. We should obtain the monies from this by saving $30 billion from the MX, $40 billion from the B-1, allocate some $20 billion to our readiness conventionally, and that's the best way to prevent limited nuclear war, because what we're going to, and there's no such thing as limited nuclear war, is trying to immediately go right in to that particular posture. We can't afford it.
Finally tonight, we have asked each of the candidates to make a brief closing statement. We begin with Senator Alan Cranston of California.
One of us will be the next Democratic presidential nominee. One of us will be the next president. It's wrong for any of us to present the American people a laundry list of promises. It's wrong for any of us to pledge to solve the problems of every group in our society. I won't do that. I refuse to tell the American people that I will do everything from A to Z. And I don't want the Democratic Party to do that. We must tell the American people a great truth, that a president must focus on one or two prime purposes. Otherwise, a president's strength and substance is squandered on 1,000 demands and crises. Jimmy Carter didn't understand that. Ronald Reagan doesn't understand that. I do. I intend to concentrate on ending the arms race and averting the danger of a nuclear holocaust and achieving full employment. In coping with every other, success in coping with every other issue hangs on our success in coping with those two.
Mr. McGovern,
I am dedicated first and foremost
your time is up,
to
sir.
freeing our children of the nuclear nightmare.
We have to move along. Mr. McGovern.
I think the one central fact we have to keep in mind is that there's no practical purpose for nuclear weapons other than deterrence. And once each side achieved the capability of utterly destroying the other one, no matter who hit first, everything that we've spent since that day has been wasted on redundancy and surplus that adds nothing at all to the security of either side. Under those conditions, the first side to have the common sense to halt any further expenditures on additional nuclear outlays is going to do two things. It's going to assume worldwide leadership on the peace issue instead of simply being one more rampaging giant on the road to annihilation. Secondly, it's going to save a lot of money that it can invest in education, in health care, in the environment, and in the kind of job-creating enterprises here at home that would put people to work.
Mr. Askew.
The Constitution requires us to provide for the common defense. In the nuclear age, this means preventing the use of nuclear weapons. It's not enough just to avoid a nuclear war. We must avoid use of even one nuclear weapon. The only purpose of nuclear weapons is to prevent them from ever being used. One way to do this is through a more effective conventional defense, which will make escalation not as likely into a nuclear conflict. The more deeply each of us feels about preventing a nuclear war, the more obligated each of us is to support a more effective conventional force. Many Americans don't believe that we Democrats believe this. We can also make use of nuclear weapons and to make sure that they they're not used, by reducing the risk of accidental wars, by halting the spread of nuclear weapons around the world, and by stopping the construction of the MX, which will simply draw fire. And so I personally believe that it's up to a President of the United States to wade in with a much higher sense of priority and to recognize that the fate of the world is at its hands, and what we're really talking about is how to avoid a nuclear conflict. Everything we do must be based on that goal.
Senator Hollings.
All of us agree, save one, on the nuclear freeze, but it'll never come to pass under President Reagan. And we're not going to proceed unless we replace Ronald Reagan with some kind of credibility on the economy. This is the Achilles heel of the Democratic Party. We had the best man in 1968 in Hubert Humphrey, but we frightened the American people on the economy and laws. Similarly in 72 with George McGovern in laws. Similarly in 1980 with President Carter, we had the best man but frightened him on the economy. So in addition to a nuclear freeze, we need an alternative of the kind that I have presented for a budget freeze so that we can show that we are responsible on the matter of the economy, thereby obtaining not only a nuclear freeze, but putting America back to work, and more than anything else, replacing Ronald Reagan in the White House, and then moving forward to true arms control.
Senator Hart.
There is no greater test of this nation's political system, of our character as a people, of our morality as human beings, than our ability in the 1980s to stop and reverse the nuclear arms race. I have given more of my time and energy to this effort in the last 9 years, overwhelmingly, than any other issue. It is the reason why I am in public life today. I think those of us who happen to be men ought to begin, finally, to listen to the women of this society, the mothers, the daughters, the sisters, who have begged male leadership in this society to end this arms race and restore some sanity and morality to our society. As President of the United States, I intend to do that.
Mr. Mondale.
I was privileged to serve under a president who tried harder in a broader range of arms control efforts than any president in American history. And we operated under the theory that there was no safety whatsoever to be found in an arms race. The entire history of nuclear armaments proves that point. I mentioned a moment ago how I helped lead the fight to stop MIRVing. We were defeated by senators who said that the Soviets weren't smart enough, they couldn't catch up, we'd bankrupt them, we'd have 10 or 15 years of superiority, and within 3 years they had MIRV, and it threatened our entire land-based system. The invention returned to plague the inventor. What the freeze movement is about, what sensible arms control is all about, is to understand that, stop it, and get back to a sensible course.
Senator Glenn.
Thank you. All Americans and all Democrats want peace. No one contests that. Our desire to leave our children a peaceful world, or indeed any world at all, does not divide us. The question now is, what will the Democratic Party offer the American people beyond just good intentions? We must offer more than we have in the past. We must offer the honesty to admit that arms control is not easy or simple or cannot be summed up in a single word. We must offer the courage to take unpopular and politically difficult stands if they will contribute to peace. We must offer a realism that acknowledges that our adversaries do not see the world as we do, that they cannot be trusted to look out for our best interests, and that even as we exhaust every effort to keep the peace, we must always be ready to defend our liberty. We must hit that balance. We must offer no less to our people. If we do, we Democrats will undoubtedly lose, and so will America.
Thank you very much. That concludes our debate on arms control among 7 men who would like to become your next president. This debate has been brought to you live from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Now, thank you all and good night.